When the Russian President Vladimir Putin threatened to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, he was engaging in something that we know as nuclear signaling, that is part of international relations literature. As we look at what this thing means and as we try to understand how China thinks about nuclear deterrence, we will explore a concept that Chinese have proposed and the way they think about deterrence in terms of a complex mechanism which combines both deterrence and compellence. It does not distinguish between the two aspects. Deterrence, first of all, means when a country threatens the use of a nuclear weapon or hostilities to stop another nation from either invading or stopping them from acting in a certain way. On the other hand, compellence as a concept is different, which is seeking to compel another country to change their behavior. And there's a very clear distinction between how deterrence and compellence work within the international relations literature. And that distinction is quite well understood within the Western IR literature. But as we know from the Chinese writing, the Chinese scholars don't really make that distinction, and they speak about deterrence as a concept which is both going to deter the opponent as well as compel them to act in a certain way. And we know this from other cases, such as the Taiwan crises that we've had in the past. There have been 3 crises in the Taiwan Strait and other standoff that China had with other countries. We know that there is a different understanding of deterrence within Chinese military thinking. The equivalent Chinese term for deterrence, that's visa, is something that can explain how Chinese think about deterrence. And there is a 2005 book, which is The Science of Military Strategy. It's a book that's produced every year, and it looks at China's military doctrine, especially in terms of deterrence. These books are not easy to access, but we have some of the past editions where the generals explain how they think about deterrence. And there are 2 generals who explain deterrence to be something which should be used to dissuade an opponent as well as make them act in a certain way. And that's how the Chinese think about deterrence. And this concept of deterrence is far more active if we try to understand why China has been conducting military exercises in Tibet and Xinjiang, which are quite consistent, and they've been happening all across different theater commands. And China is quite open about how it does these exercises. But what is the meaning behind these military exercises is to send a message. So within the deterrence and compellence theory that China has for its military strategy, they give an important role to communicating a threat. So these military exercises are not just to prepare the PLA for a hostility in the future, but also to be ready to communicate to the opponent that they have limited options and compel them to act in a certain way. And that is what matters in the context of Sino-Indian hostilities that we've seen since 2020. And therefore, understanding China's deterrence theory is very important to explaining how China might act in the future. So it's a comprehensive understanding which does not look at deterrence as a one single aspect or a theater where you can deploy forces and stop the opponent from acting in a certain way, but also to shape their options in the future, to limit that option so that the conflict remains localized within that area and the PLA can win wars. And that's a related concept that China has for localized wars. I'm not going to go into that, but it's related to how China does deterrence. This is a far new concept which is tied to information warfare, as I was discussing earlier, how the exercises happen in Tibet and Xinjiang. But equally important to this is that we should not take these activities as something that's happening across the border. That's something every country kind of does within its territory, but rather as a dynamic concept which seeks to deter and compel regional countries that China has border disputes with or other types of disputes over different issues. So therefore, we have to understand these activities within the broader context of how China does deterrence.